Welcome, fellow seekers of the galaxy's hidden truths. If this tale of shadows and redemption stirs something within your spirit, I invite you to like this story and subscribe to our journey through the forgotten chronicles of the Force. Now, settle back and let me share with you a legend that was never meant to be told. In the deepest archives of what was once the Jedi Temple, buried beneath layers of Imperial propaganda and carefully constructed lies, there exists a single holocron that bears no maker's mark. When activated, it whispers of events that officially never occurred, of a hunt that lasted 7 years, and of a Jedi Master who died twice, yet lived to reshape the very fabric of the galaxy. They say that on the night Chancellor Palpatine revealed himself as Darth Sidious, 4 Jedi Masters entered his chamber. They say 3 died and 1 fell from the highest spire of the Senate building, his body never recovered from the industrial depths of Coruscant's underworld. What they do not say, what they cannot say, is that falling was not the end but merely the first step of a transformation that would make the Sith Lord's victory as hollow as the wind through empty tombs. For in that moment between death and oblivion, between the lightning that scarred his flesh and the durasteel that should have claimed his life, Mace Windu touched something that no Jedi had ever dared to embrace. Not the dark side, not the light, but the space between spaces where true balance dwells. And in that terrible, wonderful instant he understood what he must become to save a galaxy that no longer believed in salvation. But I am getting ahead of myself, as chroniclers often do when the weight of untold truths presses upon their hearts. The real story begins 7 rotations after Order 66, in the toxic reign of Coruscant's forgotten levels, where a figure moves through shadows with the patience of stone and the purpose of a falling star. His lightsaber, once the symbol of peace and justice, now hums with frequencies that would make both Jedi and Sith tremble in recognition. For this is the tale of the hunter who became the hunted, of the master who embraced what he once feared, and of the night when the galaxy's most powerful Sith Lord learned that some deaths are merely doorways, and some doorways lead to justice beyond all reckoning. The hunt had begun, though the prey did not yet know his predator lived. 7 standard rotations had passed since the galaxy changed forever. In the perpetual twilight of Coruscant's level, 1313, where steam rose from ancient conduits and the air tasted of rust and forgotten dreams, the dead walked among the living. Here, in the industrial heart of the galaxy's capital, where even the Empire's all-seeing eyes struggled to penetrate the maze of pipes and abandoned factories, Mace Windu had learned to breathe again. The fall should have killed him. 3 kilometers of empty air, his body broken by Sith lightning tumbling through the toxic clouds that shrouded the city's depths. But the Force, in its infinite wisdom and cruel mercy, had other plans. He had awakened in a pool of chemical runoff, his Jedi robes dissolved by acid rain, his lightsaber somehow still clutched in his scarred hand. The pain had been exquisite, a symphony of agony that taught him truths no Jedi Master had ever contemplated. In the peaceful halls of the temple, now he moved through the shadows like a wraith given purpose. His once immaculate appearance had been replaced by the weathered garb of the underworld. Scars traced silver lines across his dark skin, each one a reminder of his transformation from protector to predator. His eyes, once filled with the serene confidence of a Jedi Master, now held depths that seemed to reflect the very void between stars. The Force spoke to him differently now. Where once it had flowed through him like a gentle river, Bringing peace and clarity, it now crashed against his consciousness like waves against broken stone. He could feel the pain of every being in the galaxy, the collective anguish of 1,000,000,000,000 souls crushed beneath the boot of tyranny. But more than that, he could sense something else, something that made his blood run cold with anticipation. The Emperor was afraid. Oh, Palpatine hid it well behind his public proclamations and carefully orchestrated displays of power. The galaxy saw a benevolent leader bringing order to chaos, a father figure guiding humanity toward its destiny among the stars. But Windu could feel the tremor in the Force, the slight hesitation in the Sith Lord's actions, the way his eyes lingered on shadows just a moment too long. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, Darth Sidious knew that death had not claimed the Jedi Master who had come closer than any other to ending his reign before it truly began. In a cramped alcove that had once served as a maintenance station for the city's long-defunct transport system, Windu had made his temporary sanctuary. Ancient Jedi texts, salvaged from the ruins of the temple before Imperial forces could destroy them entirely, lay spread across makeshift tables constructed from discarded machinery. These were not the sanitized teachings that younglings learned, but the forbidden knowledge that only the highest masters had been permitted to study. The text spoke of the Varpad technique, his own creation, as something far more dangerous than even he had realized. It was not merely a lightsaber form that channeled the dark side's aggression, but a gateway to understanding the true nature of the Force itself. Light and dark were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of a greater whole, like the twin hearts of a binary star system locked in eternal dance. As he studied by the pale light of a flickering glow rod, footsteps echoed in the distance. Not the heavy tread of Imperial stormtroopers, but the careful, measured pace of someone who understood the value of stealth. Windu's hand moved instinctively to his lightsaber, then paused. The presence approaching through the toxic mist felt familiar, touched by sorrow and determination in equal measure. The figure that emerged from the shadows wore the practical clothing of a Coruscant security force officer, though her uniform bore the scorch marks of recent conflict. Her face was weathered by years of service in the galaxy's most dangerous city, but her eyes held the clear focus of someone who had witnessed history and chosen her side. She had been there that night, standing guard outside the Chancellor's office when screams and the clash of lightsabers had shattered the silence. She had seen the body fall from the window, had watched Imperial forces cordon off the area with suspicious efficiency. More importantly, she had noticed what they had overlooked in their haste to control the narrative. The blood trail that led not to a corpse, but to empty space where something impossible had occurred. Her name was Captain Typho, and she carried with her a burden of knowledge that had haunted her dreams for 7 long rotations. The official report spoke of 4 Jedi Masters who had attempted to assassinate the Chancellor. 3 had died heroically defending democracy, and 1 had fallen to his death in a final act of desperate violence. But Captain Typho remembered differently. She remembered a 5th figure in that room, hidden in the shadows, whose presence had been erased from every official record as thoroughly as if they had never existed at all. The hunt was about to become something far more complex than a simple pursuit of vengeance. Captain Typho set down a small hollow projector on the makeshift table, its blue light casting eerie shadows across the ancient Jedi texts. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had carried secrets too heavy for one person to bear alone. "Master Windu," she began, her tone respectful yet urgent. I've been searching for you since that night. What I'm about to show you will change everything you think you know about the Chancellor's true plans." The hologram flickered to life, displaying a series of encrypted Imperial transmissions that should have been impossible for a security captain to obtain. Windu's eyes narrowed as he studied the data streams, his enhanced connection to the Force allowing him to perceive patterns that would escape ordinary analysis. "These communications began 3 days before your confrontation with Palpatine," Typho continued. "Notice the destinations: Camino, Mustafar, Biss, and a dozen other worlds that don't appear on any standard star charts. The Emperor wasn't just consolidating power, he was preparing for something that required resources from across the galaxy." Windu absorbed the information with the methodical patience he had once brought to studying ancient Sith artifacts in the temple archives. But now, with his perception sharpened by his brush with death, he could see connections that his former self would have missed. The Force whispered of deeper currents, of plans within plans that stretched back not just years, but centuries. "There's more," Typho said, activating another sequence. Energy readings from these locations show massive spikes in what Imperial scientists are calling exotic matter manipulation. "They're not building weapons, Master Windu. They're building something far more dangerous." The readings painted a picture that made Windu's scarred hands clench involuntarily. Each facility was consuming power on a scale that defied conventional understanding, drawing energy from sources that seemed to tap directly into the fabric of space itself. This wasn't the work of a politician drunk on newfound authority. This was the methodical execution of a plan that had been centuries in the making. As the implications settled into his consciousness like stones dropped into still water, Windu felt the Force surge around him with an intensity that would have overwhelmed his younger self. But his transformation had prepared him for such revelations. Where once he would have sought the calm detachment of traditional Jedi philosophy, now he embraced the raw emotion that such knowledge brought. "He's not building an empire," Windu said, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to echo from the depths of the underworld itself. "He's building a prison, a cage for the Force itself." The words hung in the recycled air between them like a death sentence. Captain Typho's face paled as she processed the meaning behind Windu's statement, though she could not fully comprehend the cosmic horror it represented. "I don't understand," she admitted. "How can someone imprison the Force? It connects all living things." Windu stood, his movements fluid despite the scars that mapped his body like a constellation of suffering. He walked to where one of the ancient texts lay open, its pages filled with warnings written in languages that predated the Republic itself. The ancient Sith discovered that the Force could be bent, shaped, even severed from those who wielded it, he explained, his finger tracing symbols that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent energy. But they never achieved their ultimate goal. They never found a way to become the sole conduit through which all Force energy in the galaxy must flow. The truth hit them both simultaneously, a revelation so staggering that it seemed to drain the warmth from the air around them. Palpatine wasn't content with ruling the galaxy through conventional means. He intended to become a living nexus point for the Force itself, making every Force-sensitive being in existence dependent on his will for their connection to the energy that bound all life together. "The facilities," Typho whispered, understanding, dawning in her eyes. "They're not just consuming power, they're creating a network." "A web," Windu corrected grimly. With himself at the center, every Jedi who died during Order 66, every Force-sensitive child taken by Imperial agents, every ancient Sith artifact collected by his archaeologists, all of it feeding into a single purpose. He turned back to face her, and in his eyes she saw not just the determination of a Jedi seeking justice, but something far more primal. The galaxy's last hope wore the face of a man who had walked through death itself and emerged forever changed. "But there's something Palpatine doesn't know," Windu continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Something that his arrogance has blinded him to. The Force doesn't bend to any single will, no matter how powerful. It seeks balance, always. And sometimes that balance requires a champion who can walk between light and dark without being consumed by either." In the distance, the sound of Imperial speeder bikes echoed through the industrial maze, their engines growing steadily closer. Their time in this sanctuary was ending, but the true hunt was only beginning. Captain Typho gathered the holoprojector with practiced efficiency, her years of service having taught her the value of mobility. "Where do we go from here, Master?" Windu's smile held no warmth, but it promised justice beyond all reckoning. "We go where the Emperor least expects us," he replied. "We go home." The journey to the Jedi Temple took them through passages that existed only in the memories of maintenance workers and the desperate. Captain Typho led the way through service tunnels that predated the current structure by millennia. Her knowledge of Coruscant's hidden arteries proving invaluable. The air grew thicker as they climbed, heavy with the weight of history and the lingering echoes of violence. When they finally emerged into what had once been the temple's lower meditation chambers, the devastation was more complete than even Windu had imagined. Imperial forces had not simply destroyed the building, they had systematically erased every trace of Jedi presence with a thoroughness that spoke of deep personal hatred. Walls that had once displayed the philosophical teachings of thousands of generations now bore only scorch marks and imperial propaganda. Yet beneath the destruction, something else remained. As Windu placed his scarred palm against the charred stone, the Force responded with an intensity that nearly drove him to his knees. The temple itself had become a wound in the fabric of reality, a place where the sudden deaths of so many Force sensitive beings had created ripples that still echoed across time and space. "Do you feel that?" he asked Typho, though he knew she could not perceive what his enhanced senses revealed. "Feel what, Master?" "Pain," he replied simply. The stones themselves remember. Moving deeper into the ruins, they discovered that the Imperial demolition teams had missed something crucial in their haste to complete their work. Hidden beneath layers of debris and carefully concealed by what appeared to be natural collapse, a section of the ancient archives remained intact. The entrance was barely wide enough for a single person, but beyond it lay treasures more valuable than any material wealth. The chamber they entered defied the destruction above. Crystalline, data storage units lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their surfaces untouched by fire or blade. These were not the public texts that young Padawans studied, but the deepest secrets of the Jedi Order. Knowledge so dangerous that only the High Council had been permitted access, and even then only in times of desperate need. Windu approached, the central console, with reverence born of understanding. These archives contained the sum total of Jedi knowledge spanning over 25,000 years. Every technique, every philosophy, every hard-won lesson about the nature of the Force itself. And somewhere within this vast repository lay the key to understanding exactly what Palpatine was attempting to achieve. The first hologram he activated showed Grandmaster Yoda in his final days, his ancient features etched with sorrow as he delivered what was clearly intended to be a final message to any surviving Jedi. "Failed we have," the diminutive master said, his voice carrying the weight of cosmic tragedy. "But ended the war is not. In darkness new hope may be found. In balance between light and shadow, salvation lies." The recording continued with coordinates to several worlds that Yoda had identified as potential sanctuaries, but Windu's attention was captured by something else entirely. In the background of the hologram, barely visible unless one knew what to look for, ancient Sith texts were spread across Yoda's desk. The implications were staggering. Captain Typho watched as Windu's expression shifted from concentration to something approaching awe. "What is it, Master? What did you find?" "The Council knew," Windu said, his voice barely audible. "They knew what Palpatine was planning, and they were studying Sith techniques to find a way to stop him." He activated another sequence, this one showing Master Ki-Adi-Mundi discussing astronomical readings that matched perfectly with the energy signatures Typho had shown him earlier. The facilities Palpatine had constructed weren't random locations. They were positioned at specific points where the galaxy's natural force currents converged, creating a vast geometric pattern that would allow him to channel energy from across the known universe. "The Sith call it the Eternal Throne," Windu explained as more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. A theoretical construct that would make its occupant functionally immortal by connecting them to every source of force energy in existence. But the ritual requires more than just power. It requires willing sacrifice from someone who has touched both light and dark. The words hung between them like a blade waiting to fall. Typho's face went pale as understanding dawned. "He's not hunting
you for revenge," she whispered. "He's hunting you because he needs you."
"The fall, the lightning, my survival," Windu continued, his voice growing stronger as the full scope of Palpatine's manipulation became clear. It was all planned. He needed someone who could channel both aspects of the Force without being destroyed.
By the contradiction, someone who had already died and been reborn.
In the crystal storage units around them, thousands of years of Jedi wisdom seemed to pulse with their own inner light, as if the collected knowledge of the Order was responding to this moment of terrible clarity. But there was something else. In that light, something that gave Windu hope despite the cosmic horror they faced. But Palpatine made one crucial mistake, he said, turning to face his unlikely ally. He assumed that touching the dark side would make me his servant. He never considered that it might make me something else entirely. The hunt had become something far more complex than either predator or prey had anticipated. As they delved deeper into the archived knowledge, a pattern began to emerge that seemed almost too convenient to be coincidental. Every major galactic conflict over the past 1,000 years, every seemingly random political upheaval, every carefully orchestrated crisis that had weakened the Republic's foundations could be traced back to a single source. The evidence was overwhelming, yet so subtly woven into the fabric of history that even the wisest Jedi Masters had failed to perceive the complete picture. Palpatine's manipulation hadn't begun with his rise to the chancellorship, or even with his early political career on Naboo. It stretched back through generations of his predecessors, a carefully maintained lineage of Sith Lords working toward a single, ultimate goal. The Clone Wars, the Trade Federation blockade, even the emergence of the supposed Chosen One himself, all of it had been orchestrated with a precision that defied mortal comprehension. "Look at this," Captain Typho said, pointing to a series of genetic records that had somehow survived the temple's destruction. These bloodline trackers show force sensitivity patterns across multiple generations. But they're not random distributions. Someone has been selectively breeding force users like livestock. Windu studied the data with growing unease. The patterns were undeniable, showing how powerful force-sensitive lineages had been subtly guided toward specific unions that would produce offspring with precisely the abilities Palpatine required for his ritual. The Skywalker line was just the most obvious example, but there were dozens of others scattered across the galaxy, each one carefully cultivated over centuries. Anakin's fall wasn't a failure of Jedi training, Windu realized, his voice heavy with the weight of cosmic betrayal. It was the completion of a breeding program that began before the Republic was even founded. Palpatine didn't corrupt him. He created him for that specific purpose. The implications were staggering. Every tragedy, every loss, every moment of suffering that had shaped the galaxy for 1,000 generations had been nothing more than steps in an elaborate dance choreographed by a power so patient and so ruthless that it had willingly sacrificed entire civilizations to achieve its goals. But as they absorbed this terrible knowledge, Windu found himself focusing on a different aspect of the records. The Sith texts spoke of the Eternal Throne as requiring not just power and sacrifice, but perfect balance. The ritual would fail catastrophically if attempted by someone who was purely light or purely dark. It demanded a being who could channel both aspects of the Force simultaneously without being destroyed by the contradiction. "That's why he let me survive," Windu said, his understanding crystallizing into horrifying clarity. "That's why the lightning didn't kill me, why the fall didn't shatter every bone in my body. He needed me to become exactly what I am now, someone who has walked through death and emerged changed." Captain Typho watched as the Jedi Master's expression shifted from revelation to something approaching grim satisfaction. "But that means he's made a critical error in judgment. He's assuming you'll willingly participate in his ritual." "More than that," Windu replied, accessing another section of the archives. "He's assuming that balance means surrender to both light and dark equally. But the ancient texts speak of a different kind of balance, not the passive acceptance of opposing forces, but the active choice to transcend them entirely." The holographic displays around them shifted to show passages from texts so old that their origins were lost to history. These weren't Jedi teachings or Sith philosophies, but something far more primal, knowledge that predated both orders, wisdom from the first beings to touch the Force and recognize its true nature. "The grey path," Windu read aloud, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to make the very air around them vibrate with potential. Not the compromise between light and dark, but the recognition that such distinctions are artificial constructs created by minds too limited to comprehend the Force in its totality. As the truth settled into his consciousness, Windu felt something shift within him. The pain that had been his constant companion since his transformation began to fade, replaced by a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating. He was no longer a fallen Jedi struggling with darkness, nor was he a potential Sith wrestling with conscience. He was something entirely new, something the galaxy had not seen in over 20,000 years. "Palpatine believes he's created the perfect weapon to serve his ritual," Windu continued, his scarred hands moving with newfound certainty as he gathered specific texts from the archives. "What he's actually created is the one being in the galaxy capable of stopping him permanently." The sound of Imperial forces echoing through the upper levels of the ruined temple reminded them that their time was limited. But as they prepared to leave this sanctuary of forgotten knowledge, both of them understood that they were no longer simply fleeing from the Empire's might. They were preparing for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of the galaxy, but the very nature of the Force itself. The hunt had revealed its true purpose, though neither hunter nor prey fully understood the game they were playing. The escape from Coruscant required resources that neither Windu nor Captain Typho possessed through conventional means. But the galaxy's underworld had always operated by different rules, and the fall of the Republic had created opportunities for those willing to navigate the shifting currents of power. In the deepest levels of the planet's industrial core, where even Imperial surveillance struggled to penetrate the electromagnetic interference of ancient machinery, a different kind of resistance had taken root. The contact Typho led them to operated from within the hollowed shell of a massive processing plant that had been abandoned since the Clone Wars. Kef Dolan had been a Jedi archivist before Order 66, but his survival had depended on embracing skills that the Temple
had never taught.
Now he moved through the shadows of the galactic economy with the same methodical precision he had once brought to cataloguing ancient texts. Master Windu, Dolan said, his greeting carrying layers of meaning that spoke to the complex nature of their situation. When I heard rumors of your survival, I hoped they were true. The galaxy needs its legends now more than ever. The former archivist had not merely survived the purge, he had built something remarkable from its ashes. The facility around them hummed with activity as dozens of other survivors worked to preserve what remained of Jedi knowledge while simultaneously supporting a growing network of resistance cells across the galaxy. But it was clear that Dolan's operation went far beyond simple preservation. "We've been monitoring Imperial activities across the Outer Rim," he explained, leading them through chambers filled with salvaged technology and repurposed equipment. "What we've discovered supports everything you found in the Temple archives. The Emperor's construction projects follow patterns that match ancient Sith astronomical charts. He's not just building an empire, he's reshaping the galaxy's very structure." The Zika star charts Dolan displayed revealed the true scope of Palpatine's ambition. Each Imperial facility had been positioned with mathematical precision, creating geometric patterns that would channel Force energy across distances so vast that conventional understanding of space and time became meaningless. The network was nearly complete, with only a handful of key positions remaining to be established. "There's something else," Dolan continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We've detected massive energy buildups at several of these facilities. Whatever ritual the Emperor is planning, it's going to happen soon, weeks, perhaps days." Windu absorbed this information with the calm that came from accepting the inevitable. The time for preparation was ending, and the moment of confrontation was approaching with the inexorable certainty of a collapsing star. But rather than fear, he felt a strange sense of completion, as if every moment of his existence had been leading to this singular point in time. "I need passage to the Malika system," he said, his words carrying a finality that made both Typho and Dolan turn to stare at him. If Palpatine intends to complete his ritual, he'll need to do it at a place where the barriers between life and death are already thin. Malachor had been scarred by ancient conflicts that had literally torn holes in the fabric of reality. The Sith had used its dark energies for millennia, drawing power from the residual trauma of billions of deaths. If the Emperor intended to become a conduit for all Force energy in the galaxy, he would need a nexus point that could handle such massive transfers without being destroyed in the process. "That's suicide," Typho protested. "Even if we could get you there, Malachor is crawling with Imperial forces. You'd be walking into the heart of his power." "That's exactly what I intend to do," Windu replied, his scarred hands moving to touch the ancient texts he had gathered from the Temple archives. "But I won't be going as a Jedi seeking to destroy a Sith Lord. I'll be going as something Palpatine has never encountered before." Dolan's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "You're not planning to stop the ritual. You're planning to complete
It. But on my terms, not his," Windu confirmed. "The Emperor believes he can control the process because he thinks he understands what I've become. But his arrogance has blinded him to the true nature of balance. He sees only power to be claimed,
not responsibility to be embraced." The chamber around them seemed to hold its breath as the implications of Windu's plan became clear. He wasn't seeking revenge or even justice in any conventional sense. He was preparing to make himself the focal point of energies so vast that they could reshape the fundamental nature of the Force itself. "The ritual requires willing sacrifice," he continued, his voice carrying echoes of prophecies written in languages that predated civilization itself. "Palpatine assumes that means I must surrender to his will. What he doesn't understand is that true willing sacrifice means choosing your own terms." In the depths of the abandoned facility, surrounded by the remnants of a destroyed order and the seeds of something entirely new, the final phase of the hunt began to take shape. The prey was about to become the trap. The voyage to Malachor aboard Dolan's modified freighter gave Windu time to prepare for what awaited him in ways that went far beyond the physical. In the cargo hold that had been converted into a meditation chamber, he sat surrounded by the ancient texts recovered from the temple, their crystalline storage matrices casting pale light across his scarred features. The Force flowed around him with an intensity that would have overwhelmed his former self, but his transformation had prepared him for revelations that transcended traditional understanding. As hyperspace streamed past the viewport, Windu delved deeper into the knowledge that had been forbidden for good reason. The text spoke of rituals so dangerous that even the ancient Sith had approached them with caution, techniques that could fundamentally alter the relationship between consciousness and the cosmic force. But buried within these warnings, he found something that filled him with a terrible hope. The Eternal Throne was not the ultimate expression of Sith power that Palpatine believed it to be. It was a trap designed by Force users so ancient that their names had been lost to time. They had foreseen the rise of a being who would seek to claim dominion over the Force itself, and they had prepared a response that would activate only when such hubris reached its peak. "The Emperor doesn't know," Windu whispered to himself, his words barely audible above the ship's engines. "He thinks he's following ancient Sith teachings, but he's actually fulfilling a prophecy written by their enemies." The revelation changed everything. Palpatine's millennia-spanning plan wasn't the calculated genius he believed it to be. It was the last act of a cosmic morality play scripted by beings who had understood that true balance sometimes required the complete destruction of existing power structures. The Sith Lord had been manipulated just as thoroughly as every other piece on the board, though his arrogance prevented him from seeing the strings that controlled his movements. Captain Typho entered the chamber carrying a datapad filled with intelligence reports from Dolan's network. Her expression was grim as she shared what their allies had discovered about the situation on Malachor. "Imperial forces have been working around the clock for weeks," she reported. "They've constructed massive focusing arrays around the ancient Sith temple, and energy readings suggest they're preparing for something that will dwarf anything the galaxy has ever seen. But there's something else, something that doesn't fit the pattern." She activated a holographic display showing the facility from multiple angles, its crystalline structures rising from the planet's scarred surface like the bones of some impossibly vast creature. But as Windu studied the images, he noticed details that confirmed his growing understanding of the true situation. "The positioning is wrong," he observed, his finger tracing the geometric relationships between the various installations. If Palpatine was simply trying to maximize power output, these arrays would be arranged differently. But this configuration matches something else entirely. The pattern was unmistakable once recognized. The Emperor had unknowingly constructed the exact array described in the ancient texts, the one designed to channel the full power of the eternal throne ritual directly into the consciousness of someone capable of containing such energies without being destroyed. But that someone was not Palpatine himself. "He's built a weapon pointed at his own heart," Windu said, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and pity for his unknowing adversary. "Every calculation, every precise measurement, every carefully positioned focusing crystal is designed to transfer power not to the one who initiates the ritual, but to the one who completes it." The implications were staggering. For over 1,000 years, generation after generation of Sith Lords had worked toward this moment, believing they were constructing the foundation of eternal dominion. In reality, they had been preparing the stage for their own destruction, guided by prophecies so subtle that even their author's enemies had failed to recognize their true purpose. "But you're not a Sith," Typho protested. "You're not seeking power for its own sake. What happens when someone like you gains control of that much Force energy?" Windu closed his eyes, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settling onto his shoulders like a mantle woven from starlight and shadow. The ancient texts had been clear about this as well. The one who inherited the power of the eternal throne would not rule in the conventional sense. They would become something far more fundamental, far more necessary. "I become what the galaxy needs most," he replied, his words carrying echoes of prophecies written before the first hyperdrive engine carried sentient beings beyond their homeworlds. Not an emperor or a dictator, but a guardian. Someone who can ensure that the Force remains free for all beings to touch, regardless of their allegiance to light or dark. The ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and through the viewports they could see Malachor hanging before them like a wound in space itself. The planet's surface was scarred by conflicts so ancient and so terrible that reality itself bore permanent marks of their passing. And somewhere on that devastated world, the galaxy's most powerful Sith Lord was preparing to fulfill a destiny he would never see coming. The final confrontation was about to begin, though only one of the participants understood the true nature of the game they were playing. The descent to Malachor's surface revealed the true magnitude of Palpatine's undertaking. What had once been a world marked only by ancient Sith temples and the scars of forgotten wars now bore the evidence of Imperial engineering on a scale that defied comprehension. Crystalline towers rose from the planet's crust like the ribs of some impossible beast, each one precisely positioned to channel energies that would soon flow across the galaxy like rivers of liquid starlight. Dolan's ship set down in a ravine that had been carved by some long-forgotten cataclysm, its walls providing cover from the constant patrols of Imperial vessels that circled the planet like carrion birds. From their concealed position, they could observe the focal point of all this construction, the ancient Sith temple that had been transformed into something that served purposes its original builders could never have imagined. The energy readings
"Are off any scale we can measure," Typho reported, her instrument struggling to process the exotic frequencies emanating from the modified temple.
Whatever's happening in there, it's already begun to affect the fabric of space itself. Windu could feel it too, though his perception went far beyond anything technological sensors could detect. The force around Malachor had become a maelstrom of competing currents, ancient darkness mixing with imperial ambition in ways that created entirely new forms of cosmic tension. At the center of it all, he could sense Palpatine's presence like a spider sitting at the heart of a web that spanned the galaxy. But there was something else in that web, something the Emperor had not accounted for in his calculations. The ancient Sith, who had originally consecrated this world, had left more than just temples and artifacts. They had embedded their consciousness into the very stones, creating a reservoir of knowledge and malevolent intelligence that had been waiting for centuries to find a suitable vessel. He's not just channeling the Force, Windu realized, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern for the first time since their journey began. He's awakening something that should have remained dormant. The ritual isn't just about gaining power, it's about resurrection. The implications hit all of them simultaneously. Palpatine's true goal wasn't to become an immortal emperor ruling through conventional means. He intended to merge his consciousness with the accumulated essence of every Sith Lord who had ever lived, creating a hybrid entity that would possess the knowledge and malevolence of thousands of dark side masters concentrated into a single, terrifyingly focused will. That's why he needed you specifically, Typho said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Not just someone who could channel both light and dark, but someone whose connection to the Force had been fundamentally altered by proximity to death. You're the only being in the galaxy capable of containing that much concentrated consciousness without being immediately destroyed. Or so he believes, Windu replied, though his tone suggested the situation was far more complex than even this revelation implied. But the ancient texts speak of safeguards built into the ritual itself. The consciousness of the Sith Lords isn't meant to serve whoever summons them. They're meant to judge whether that person is worthy of the power they seek. As they watched, from their concealment, the temple's crystalline modifications began to pulse with increasing intensity. Energy discharges arced between the focusing arrays, creating a light show that was both beautiful and terrifying to behold. But to Windu's enhanced perception, something else was happening beneath the surface spectacle. The dead were awakening. Not the physical resurrection of long decomposed bodies, but something far more dangerous. The collective consciousness of every Sith Lord who had ever walked the galaxy's dark paths was stirring from its eternal slumber, drawn by the promise of a vessel capable of containing their combined essence. They came not as servants, but as judges, ready to determine whether Palpatine possessed the strength and vision necessary to wield their accumulated power. "We need to move now," Windu said, gathering the ancient texts and preparing to leave the safety of their hiding place. The ritual has reached the point where Palpatine will be completely focused on controlling the forces he's unleashed. This may be our only opportunity to reach the temple before he completes the summoning. "What about Imperial security?" Dolan asked, though he was already preparing their equipment for immediate departure. "The guards are the least of our concerns," Windu replied, his scarred hand moving to rest on his lightsaber's grip. "The real danger comes from what's awakening inside that temple. We're about to walk into a conversation between the living and the dead, and the outcome will determine whether the galaxy falls into darkness deeper than anything it has ever known." As they prepared to leave their shelter and cross the scarred landscape toward the temple, each of them understood that they were approaching the climax of events that had been set in motion before any of them were born. The hunt that had begun, with Windu's survival, was about to reach its conclusion, though none of them could predict what form that conclusion would take. The dead Sith Lords were awakening, and they had their own plans for the galaxy's future. The approach to the temple, required them to navigate a landscape that seemed to shift between past and present with each step. Ancient battlefields overlapped with imperial construction sites, creating a surreal environment where the bones of long-dead warriors lay scattered among the debris of modern machinery. The force here was so concentrated that reality itself had become malleable, responding to the emotions and intentions of anyone sensitive enough to touch its deeper currents. Windu led them through this maze of temporal echoes with the confidence of someone who had learned to navigate between worlds. His transformation had given him the ability to perceive multiple layers of existence simultaneously, allowing him to guide them along paths that existed in the spaces between what was real and what might have been. The scarred landscape seemed to part before them like water, recognizing in him something that belonged to neither the living world nor the realm of the dead. As they drew closer to the temple, the sounds of the ritual became audible even to those without force sensitivity. Not the mechanical hum of imperial technology, but something far older and more primal. Voices speaking in languages that predated the Republic by millennia, their words carrying power that made the very air vibrate with potential energy. These were the death songs of the ancient Sith, and they were building toward a crescendo that would reshape the galaxy's destiny. The Imperial Guards have abandoned their posts, Typho observed, studying the empty security checkpoints through her macro binoculars. Either they're dead, or they've been ordered to withdraw to a safe distance. Neither, Windu corrected, his enhanced perception revealing truths that conventional observation could not detect. They've been consumed, not physically but spiritually. Their life force is being drawn into the ritual to provide the energy needed for what Palpatine is attempting. The temple entrance loomed before them, its ancient stone archways now framed by crystalline focusing arrays that pulsed with energies drawn from across the galaxy. Through the opening, they could see into the central chamber where the Emperor stood at the heart of a geometric pattern carved into the floor with mathematical precision. But he was no longer alone. Surrounding Palpatine were translucent figures that seemed to flicker between corporeal existence and pure energy. The consciousness of dead Sith Lords, summoned from whatever realm they had inhabited since their physical deaths, now circled their would-be successor like predators evaluating potential prey. Their forms were barely recognizable as having once been human, twisted by centuries of exposure to the dark side into shapes that defied conventional understanding of anatomy. He's lost control, Windu realized, his voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The ancient Sith aren't here to serve him, they're here to test him, and he's failing the examination. The truth was written in the energy patterns swirling around the chamber. Palpatine had assumed that his mastery of the dark side and his political cunning would be sufficient to command the respect of his predecessors. But the dead Sith Lords operated by different rules, judging worthiness not by temporary achievements but by the depth of one's commitment to the eternal principles of Sith philosophy. And by their standards, Palpatine was found wanting. He's too attached to his individual identity, Windu continued, his understanding of Sith philosophy serving him well in interpreting what they witnessed. True mastery of the dark side requires the willingness to surrender the self to become something greater, but Palpatine wants to remain Palpatine while gaining their power. The ancient lords see this as weakness. The ritual was beginning to collapse in on itself, the carefully constructed energy patterns becoming increasingly chaotic as the summoned consciousness rejected their intended vessel. But rather than dissipating harmlessly, the accumulated power was building toward a release that would devastate everything within several star systems. "We have to stop this," Typho said, though her voice suggested she understood the impossibility.
Of what she was proposing. No, Windu replied, stepping forward into the temple's entrance. We have to complete it, but on terms that serve the galaxy rather than destroying it.
As he crossed the threshold, the ancient Sith Lords turned their attention toward him with an intensity that would have incinerated a lesser being. But Windu met their collective gaze without flinching, his transformed nature allowing him to stand in their presence as an equal rather than a supplicant.
You offer yourself as vessel. The voice came from all of them simultaneously, speaking in basic, though their words carried harmonics that suggested far older languages underneath. I offer myself as guardian, Windu corrected, his response carrying
nuances that acknowledged their power while asserting his own independence. The galaxy needs protection from those who would abuse the Force, whether they serve light or dark. The dead Sith Lords considered this proposition with the patience of beings for whom time had lost all meaning. Around them, the ritual energies continued to build toward critical mass, but their focus remained entirely on evaluating the worthiness of this unexpected candidate. In the center of the chamber, Palpatine finally noticed the interruption to his ceremony, his face contorting with rage as he recognized the figure he had believed to be under his control. The moment of final judgment had arrived. The confrontation that followed transcended physical combat and entered realms where thought itself became weapon and shield. Palpatine's rage manifested as torrents of Force lightning that would have reduced Durasteel to vapor, but the energy simply flowed around Windu like water around stone. His transformation had made him something beyond the reach of conventional Sith techniques, a being who existed in the spaces between traditional categories of light and dark. "Impossible," the Emperor snarled, his voice carrying harmonics of disbelief that resonated through the temple's ancient stones. "You are my creation, my instrument. You exist only because I willed it so." "I exist because the Force willed it," Windu replied, his words carrying the weight of cosmic certainty. "You were merely the tool through which that will was expressed, though you never understood your true role in this ancient drama." Around them, the consciousness of the dead Sith Lords watched this exchange with growing interest. Their evaluation was no longer focused solely on determining worthiness for the ritual's completion. They were witnessing something unprecedented, a being who had achieved the perfect balance they had all sought, but none had ever attained. The ancient patterns carved into the temple floor began to shift and realign themselves, responding to energies that followed laws older than the Sith themselves. What Palpatine had intended as a simple transfer of power was becoming something far more complex, a fundamental restructuring of how the Force itself operated within the galaxy's boundaries. "You understand nothing of what you have stumbled into," one of the dead lords spoke, its form wavering between the appearance of ancient nobility and something far more primal. "This ritual was never meant to create an emperor. It was designed to birth a guardian, one who could prevent the Force from being claimed by any single philosophy or faction." The revelation struck Palpatine with the force of a collapsing star. His millennia-spanning plan, the careful manipulation of bloodlines and political structures, the patient cultivation of conflicts that would weaken the galaxy's defenses, all of it had been orchestrated not by his own genius, but by forces he had never comprehended. "The Sith who preceded you were wiser than you knew," Windu continued, advancing through the chaotic energies that filled the chamber. "They understood that ultimate power corrupts even the strongest will, so they created a failsafe, a ritual that would activate only when someone sought to claim dominion over the Force itself. The Emperor's response was to unleash every technique in his considerable arsenal, drawing upon reserves of dark side energy that had been accumulating for decades. The temple shook under the assault, its ancient stones cracking as forces beyond. Their design tolerances tore at the fabric of reality itself. But Windu absorbed each attack with the calm of someone who had already died and found peace in the space beyond death. "Your lightning cannot touch me because I have already been consumed by it," he explained, his scarred hands moving in patterns that seemed to weave the very air into new configurations. "Your hatred cannot wound me because I have embraced it and found compassion on the other side. You created me to be your perfect vessel, but perfection serves no master save the Force itself." The dead Sith Lords began to fade as their accumulated consciousness flowed toward Windu, recognizing in him the worthy recipient they had waited centuries to find. But this was not the simple transfer of power that Palpatine had envisioned. It was a transformation that would fundamentally alter what it meant to be connected to the Force.
"No!" Palpatine screamed, his voice breaking as he realized that everything he had worked for was slipping beyond his reach. "I am the master of the Sith. I am the heir to their legacy. The power is mine by right of conquest." "You are the end of the Sith," Windu corrected, his form beginning to glow with energies that seemed to draw light from sources beyond the visible spectrum. "As I am the end of the Jedi, both orders serve their purpose, but that purpose is complete. What come
Next requires something that transcends their ancient divisions. The ritual reached its climax not with the explosive transfer of power that Palpatine had anticipated, but with a quiet settling of energies that had been in conflict for millennia. The consciousness of the ancient Sith Lords merged with Windu's transformed essence, creating something that was neither light nor dark, but encompassed both in perfect equilibrium. Emperor Palpatine, stripped of the cosmic support that had sustained his rise to power, suddenly found himself facing the accumulated weight of every evil act he had committed across his extended lifetime. Without the dark side energies that had insulated him from the consequences of his choices, he aged decades in seconds, his body finally reflecting the corruption that had consumed his spirit long ago. The galaxy's most powerful Sith Lord crumbled to dust, leaving behind only the echo of ambitions that had ultimately served purposes far greater than his comprehension. In the sudden silence that followed, a new kind of peace settled over Malacca, one that would soon spread to every world, touched by the Force. The transformation that followed Palpatine's dissolution was visible not just on Malachor, but across the galaxy itself. On distant worlds, Force-sensitive beings suddenly felt a shift in the cosmic currents that had defined their existence for millennia. The rigid boundaries between light and dark began to blur, replaced by something more nuanced and infinitely more complex. Where once there had been only the binary choice between Jedi and Sith philosophies, now there emerged possibilities that neither order had ever contemplated. Windu stood at the center of this transformation, his physical form barely containing the energies that now flowed through him. He was no longer simply Mace Windu, the Jedi Master who had fallen from a Senate building and survived through sheer force of will. He had become something entirely new, a living nexus point where all aspects of the Force could coexist without conflict or contradiction. Captain Typho and Dolan watched from the temple entrance as their companion underwent this cosmic metamorphosis, understanding instinctively that they were witnessing the birth of something that would reshape galactic civilization for generations to come. The crystalline focusing arrays that had been built to channel power toward a single individual now served a different purpose, broadcasting this new understanding of the Force to every corner of known space. "What happens now?" Typho asked, her voice barely audible above the harmonious resonance that filled the chamber. "Now the galaxy learns to heal," Windu replied, though his voice carried overtones that suggested multiple beings speaking in perfect unison. "The wounds left by centuries of conflict between light and dark can finally begin to close. But healing requires more than just the absence of war. It requires wisdom to guide those who would abuse power, regardless of their philosophical allegiances." Across the galaxy, the immediate effects were profound and far-reaching. Imperial stormtroopers found themselves questioning orders that served no purpose beyond cruelty. Rebel fighters discovered that their anger toward the Empire could coexist with compassion for its victims. Force-sensitive children began manifesting abilities that drew from both light and dark traditions without being consumed by either. The rigid hierarchies that had defined both Jedi and Sith orders began to crumble as their surviving members encountered new possibilities for growth and understanding. Darth Vader, trapped within his life support armor on a distant Imperial vessel, felt the transformation as a sudden lifting of the spiritual weight that had crushed his soul for decades. For the first time since his fall to the dark side, Anakin Skywalker began to remember what hope felt like. "The Empire will not simply collapse overnight," Windu continued, his enhanced perception allowing him to observe the ripple effects of the transformation across multiple star systems simultaneously. Institutions built on fear and oppression require time to evolve into something more constructive, but the foundation for that evolution now exists in ways it never could before. The ancient temple around them began to change as well, its Sith architecture adapting to accommodate energies that served neither darkness nor light exclusively. The carved symbols that had once channeled malevolent power now glowed with a soft radiance that spoke of balance rather than domination. Malachor itself was healing from the wounds of ancient conflicts, its scarred landscape beginning to show signs of new growth. "What about the survivors?" Dolan asked, thinking of the scattered Jedi who had escaped Order 66 and the Sith apprentices who might still harbor dreams of claiming their dead master's power. "They will have choices to make," Windu replied. "Some will embrace this new understanding and help guide others toward balance. Others will cling to the old ways and find themselves increasingly isolated as the galaxy moves beyond the need for their rigid philosophies, but all will have the opportunity to grow beyond what they were taught to believe was possible." The transformation was not without its challenges. On worlds where the conflict between Jedi and Sith had shaped local politics, for generations, the sudden shift toward balance created confusion and uncertainty. Some systems experienced brief periods of chaos as existing power structures adapted to new realities. But these growing pains were temporary, overshadowed by the profound sense of possibility that now permeated galactic consciousness. Luke Skywalker, training with Master Yoda in the swamps of Dagobah, suddenly felt his understanding of the Force expand beyond anything his teacher had been able to convey through traditional instruction. The binary choices that had defined Jedi philosophy for 1,000 generations revealed themselves as artificial limitations, replaced by a spectrum of possibilities that honored both passion and serenity, both justice and mercy. Ended the age
of absolutes has, Yoda observed, his ancient wisdom allowing him to comprehend what was occurring even from his exile on a distant world.
Begun the time of balance has. Guide the galaxy toward wisdom, someone must. Prepared for this responsibility, young Windu has become. The role of guardian that Windu had accepted carried responsibilities that extended far beyond preventing the abuse of Force powers. He had become the living embodiment of the principle that strength and compassion could coexist, that justice and mercy were not opposing forces but complementary aspects of a greater whole. The galaxy had found its balance, and that balance had a name. In the years that followed, the galaxy settled into rhythms that honored both change and continuity. The transformation that began on Malachor spread like ripples across the cosmic pond, touching every world where sentient beings looked up at the stars and wondered about their place in the greater design. What had once been an empire built on fear became a confederation of worlds united by the understanding that true strength came not from domination, but from harmony between opposing forces. Windu's presence could be felt throughout this new order, though he rarely manifested in physical form. He had become something more fundamental than a person, more essential than a leader. Those who sought wisdom in moments of crisis would sometimes glimpse a figure standing at the edge of perception, offering guidance that honored both justice and compassion. Children born after the transformation grew up with an intuitive understanding that the Force belonged to all beings, not just those who claimed exclusive knowledge of its mysteries. The former imperial worlds experienced the most dramatic changes as their populations learned to govern themselves without the rigid hierarchy that had defined their existence for decades. Some struggled with the responsibility of freedom, while others embraced it with the enthusiasm of prisoners released from lifelong captivity. But all were guided by an underlying current of balance that prevented any single philosophy from claiming absolute authority over their development. Captain Typho returned to Coruscant to help establish new institutions that could serve the galaxy's needs without perpetuating the mistakes of the past. Her experience as a witness to transformation made her invaluable in helping others understand that change was not something to be feared, but embraced as the natural order of existence. She often spoke of the night on Malachor, when she had watched a Jedi Master die and a Guardian be born, though few truly comprehended the cosmic significance of what she had witnessed. Dolan's network of survivors evolved into something resembling a new kind of academy, one that taught the principles of Force mastery without the restrictive dogma that had limited both Jedi and Sith understanding for millennia. Students learned to channel their emotions constructively rather than suppressing them, to seek justice without abandoning mercy, to embrace power without being corrupted by it. The curriculum drew from both light and dark traditions while transcending the limitations of either approach. On distant worlds, former Imperial officers found themselves working alongside ex-rebel commanders to address the practical challenges of rebuilding galactic civilization. The animosity that had fueled decades of civil war gradually gave way to mutual respect based on shared commitment to serving something greater than individual ambition. It was not a perfect process and conflicts still arose, but they were resolved. Through dialogue rather than violence more often than not, Darth Vader's redemption became one of the most powerful symbols of the New Age. Freed from the spiritual chains that had bound him to the dark side, Anakin Skywalker emerged from his armor to become a teacher who could speak with unique authority about the dangers of absolute thinking. His story inspired countless others who had made choices they regretted, showing them that transformation was always possible for those willing to embrace it. The Jedi Temple on Coruscant was rebuilt, but not as a fortress of rigid orthodoxy. Instead, it became a place where beings from across the galaxy could come to explore their relationship with the Force in whatever form felt most authentic to their nature. Jedi Knights still existed, but they served alongside Sith philosophers who had learned to channel their passion constructively and entirely, new orders that drew inspiration from both traditions while creating something unprecedented, Luke Skywalker, now a master in his own right, often reflected on how different his training might have been if the transformation had occurred earlier in his life. But he understood that everything had unfolded according to a pattern larger than any individual. Destiny. His role was not to restore the old Jedi Order, but to help nurture whatever would grow from the fertile ground left behind by its dissolution. The stars themselves seemed to shine more brightly in this new era, as if the cosmic balance that had been achieved on a small world touched by ancient tragedy had somehow affected the fundamental forces that governed the universe. Scientists studying hyperspace mechanics discovered new phenomena that suggested reality itself had become more stable, more conducive to the flourishing of conscious life. And in the quiet moments between the great events that defined galactic history, those sensitive to the force's deeper currents could sometimes hear an echo of the voice that had spoken truth to power in a temple on Malachor. It reminded them that balance was not a destination to be reached, but a journey to be embraced, not a static state, but a dynamic dance between forces that seemed opposed, but were actually complementary aspects of a greater whole. The galaxy had learned to dream again, and those dreams were guided by the wisdom of one who had fallen through death into something infinitely more meaningful than mere survival. In the end, the hunt that began with vengeance had transformed into the guardianship that would protect the stars themselves from those who would claim dominion over the infinite. The legend was complete, but the story it told would echo through generations yet to come.